All right. We're here today with Mark Reeder. How you doing, man?
Hello, welcome. Yeah,
Thanks for coming on the show.
thank you very much.
So do you remember when you first fell in love with music as a kid?
Oh yeah. I don't remember the exact moment, but I do remember one particular thing was when I was a little child, about 4. I was fascinated by this band called the Tornadoes, and they had this song called Telstar, which was about space, and it was like back then it was the beginnings of the space race. And I remember seeing this band on the telly, and they were playing Telstar. The bass player was a German guy called Heinz, and he had blonde hair and sunglasses and a polo neck sweater, and he looked dead cool. And I was like, wow. And then in the mornings on the radio they play the record, and being a little child, you always want to hear it again and again and again. And they only ever played it once. My mother would get really infuriated, and eventually she dragged me down to Rumble's record shop in Denton, where I grew up as a child, and she gave me the money and said, "Yeah, go to that lady and ask her so you want to buy this record, And so I did, and that was my first record, and I still got it actually.
Oh, nice.
And yeah. It doesn't play very well. It looks like someone's had the dinner off it, but it's it's like that was my first record. Yeah, and after that, I really can't. And then I think after that, I was like captivated by Doctor Who, and the theme of Doctor Who. The beginning, this kind of like surreal synthesizer. I didn't know what a synthesizer was because there wasn't such a thing back then. It was just this electronic music, but it sounded so futuristic, And it was dead scary, and I loved it, But back then you couldn't buy it; it was just on the telly, And I was completely captivated by that, and I think that obviously kind of influenced my kind of like sort of obsession, if you like, with synthesizers. Obviously, this Doctor Who thing, and then I was kind of like pretty much obsessed. I'm actually pretty much obsessed with like Jerry Anderson's puppet series, like. Fireball XL5, Supercar, Fireball XL5, Thunderbird, Stingray, Captain Scarlet, that kind of thing. And I found his music really thrilling and kind of gripping. And it was like, you've had this puppet series, which was for kids, but it was kind of adult at the same time, and it sounded so like a Hollywood movie, but it was just for a TV show, for a kids' TV show, And that's kind of like guided me through my entire life, really.
Awesome. So the spaciness sort of hit you right away.
Yeah, I've been obsessed with space since being a really small child. Even in the 70s when I started taking drugs and kind of experimenting with like psychedelic music and stuff. And I was into Hawkwind and things like that. Yeah, nice. I built myself this space box. Because I come from Manchester, right, and in Manchester, it's notorious for its weather, and we have it rains nearly all the time. It was only when I came to Germany that I realised the pavements were actually dry on, because it was always raining in Manchester. You never saw the sun from one week's end to the next, and it was always grey and miserable, and you never saw the stars. So I built myself the star. I built this box. I got this like big, huge cardboard box, and I got these kind of blue filter papers from like stage lights. Yeah, they have filters on lights back then. Kind of a gel kind of thing. I got a load of those, and I painted with like luminous paint. I've painted like dots on this blue thing and put these kind of like layers in this box, so it just looked like space, and I could light it up at night and just kind of like trip out to this, listening to Hawkwind.
Nice.
Yeah.
So in 1978, you went to buy some records in Germany, and your life forever changed.
Yeah, well, I'd already started going to Germany when I became 18. I was like obsessed. My first venture to Europe was in the very early 70s with my parents, and we went on a day trip to France. And back then, you needed a passport and you needed a visa to get into France, and like you do now. Yeah. And I was like, wow, it's another world, because I grew up in Manchester in this council house, and our kind of like dinner was like fish and chips and baked beans and toast and things like this. It wasn't anything special. And I went to France and they had croissants and all this kind of fancy food. And I was like, oh, they have a completely different lifestyle here in this kind of like continent, you know. And when I was about sort of like, 16, 17, I thought, as soon as I get a passport, I'm going to go and explore. So when I was 18, I got a passport and I went on a trip. I went to France. I went to look at Dunkirk, like where the British Army had kind of like tried to escape during the war. And then I hitchhiked into Germany with the obsession of like, I'll go to these like German record shops and buy some records. There were so many records, I couldn't carry everything. So I thought I'm going to have to go back again. And I went back a couple of times, and every time I kind of went, I would talk about people about what, the rest of Germany, where's good, where possibly might get a great place to find some records in, Hamburg was always a suggestion, Munich, forget it, but like Hamburg was always good. And every time I asked people about Berlin, they'd always go, "Oh, you don't want to go there. What do you want to go there for?" It's always like, it's not. I think it kind of, for West Germans, it was like a bit of a. It wasn't representative of what West Germany kind of thought themselves to being. It wasn't clean and shiny. It was kind of something else. It was occupied in the middle of the communist state. In the middle of nowhere. And I was like, oh, I bet if no one goes there, I bet there's loads of record shops that have loads of records that I can buy. So I thought I'm going to go, and eventually managed to hitchhike to Berlin in 1978, and I never left. I arrived here thinking I was going to go and buy a load of records. I eventually did, but what the city kind of had was this something that no other city actually had. It wasn't just the fact that they had a wall around it, which kind of made it unique, but it was like the ambience of the entire city was completely different to any other city that I'd been to and traveled to. So I was like, wow, this is amazing. I'm going to just explore a little bit and stay a little bit and, check it out for a few weeks. And then I'll go back, back to Britain. And I never did.
40 years later, we're still there.
Over 4 years. Yeah.
Wow. And you were factories man in Berlin.
Well, I knew Joy Division before, I knew Joy Division. I mean, Ian Curtis even before he was in a band, and it was like, Rob Gretton, who became their manager, was a DJ in one of the clubs in Manchester. And I used to work in a record shop from being a teenager, actually. And, I'd supply these DJs all their records and, make suggestions and stuff. And when Joy Division actually made their first single, they came into the shop and asked me, "Yeah, can you put it in the shop and sell it?" Which I did, of course. An ideal for living. And so I knew the people who were involved, and I actually knew Tony Wilson as well, from being 14 almost, and he'd come in every Saturday evening just before closing time and ask me to put some records aside, get new records, any cool ones put to one side, and I kind of supplied all these people with music, and make suggestions, and I'd order stuff for them in thinking this is probably like that, and so I got really involved with them. And then when I actually moved to Germany, the first thing that Rob Gretton said was like, can I send you some records and you can send them to the radio stations and maybe we'll get some airplay, and you never know, we might get a gig, And no one was remotely interested in this miserable band from Manchester. They didn't care, I didn't get any reaction at all, not even a thank you,
Wow. And you put on their one show. What was that like?
Well, I was thinking all the time, like, I think probably the reason why people don't really understand this music was because the fact that they don't know, they've never seen Joy Division perform live. They don't know what they're like, so they have to see them to be able to understand. And I went to the Kino, which was a kind of like a middle-sized kind of like maybe 200 people would fit in kind of club, It was actually a cinema, but they had gigs on. I was seated, a seated venue.
Oh, wow.
But they'd have gigs on there, and like new wavy gigs, And I thought, Connie Konchak is a bit of an arty guy, and he likes films and music, and he has a ponytail. And I thought, he's enough of a hippie to understand, but he's also kind of adventurous, having kind of bands on and stuff. I went to him and he was like, "Who are they? I'm not interested at all." It's like, never heard of it. I said, you got to hear the records. You got to hear the records. And I, give him the singles and gave him the album. Didn't hear anything, and I kept going to watch bands, of course, there, and I'd see him and say, "Have you thought about it?" And nothing. And then the Joy Division started to get, after they released Unknown Pleasures, they started to get quite a lot of recognition in the British music papers. Then it's like, oh, this is actually a really good album. That's not so bad. And so then he kind of became a bit aware, And he was like, well, if you hear them doing a tour and coming to Europe, just let me know, and maybe we can put them on. And then Rob Gretton told us, yeah, we might possibly have a gig in Cologne. I was like, oh, you can come to Berlin. It's really close. Berlin's really close. It's like 10-hour drive. Just it's really close to come to Berlin. They hadn't looked on the map. It's about this far. And then they did. They said, all right, we'll come. And I said to Connie, yeah, they're in Cologne and they're going to come. So we managed to get this gig on. They had a Dutch promoter team working for them, and I'm like, yeah, you got to come to Berlin. Anyway, we managed to pull it off, and they came to Berlin, and it was like 21st of January 1980, and it was fucking freezing. It was like minus God knows what, snowing, blizzards, and everything. The PA guys got lost in East Germany trying to come back to Berlin, and band got in. I took them to East Berlin, showed them around, and then we came to do this gig on the next day, and 58 people came to the gig, and it was like, and I think the people, they came with this kind of not animosity, but kind of like a bit suspicious, really, about Joy Division, because they didn't know where to kind of categorize them, because they weren't punk and they weren't really new wave and they weren't the rock, they were a bit of something else. And this image of the first single with this kind of Hitler Youth drummer on the cover, and the name Joy Division kind of resembling, like where it came from, being the whorehouse of the SS and everything. It was like, it had this kind of right-wingish kind of tinge to the name and everything, and I think a lot of Germans were a bit kind of suspicious, And then this band comes on stage, and the first song, the PA was rubbish, actually. The guy who brought the PA, it was like a stereo, that he brought with him. It's like the PA cost about 15 quid a night, and it was rubbish. You couldn't hear Ian singing at all. And one guy in the front, thinking that Bernard Sumner, who had the stage name of Bernard Albrecht. Right. He thought he was German and he spoke German. So the guy shouting, in German, turn the volume up of the voice, right? And Bernard just turns around and goes, speak fucking English, you German bastard. And it's like, it was as if it just poured ice over the entire crowd. It's like the gig was almost virtually over then, it was like, right, Wow. So that was my... my first and only Joy Division gig.
And you mentioned East Germany. Last time we spoke, you were telling me about the blues masses, which I just found fascinating. Can you expound on that for anyone who might not know?
Yeah, well, I've been coming to Berlin and checking out what West Berlin's all about and stuff. I also, Berlin's a dual city. It has another side to it, beyond the wall. This East Berlin business. What it's all about, communism and everything, watchtowers and border guards and stuff, and story of myth, the spy who came in from the cold and all that kind of stuff. The Funeral in Berlin with Michael Caine, all these movies I'd seen as a kid, I was like near I was in the city where it was all happening. And I just had to go and see this East Berlin business, Yeah. And I went over for the first day, and it was fascinating. It was like being down into another era, like another world. It kind of resembled the West in certain aspects, but on other ways it was just like being in this kind of surreal film set. It was like Star Trek or something. It was fascinating, and I was like, wow, I have to come back. I have to come back the next day. I went the next day. I actually went every single day for about 2 weeks. These Germans are a bit suspicious. He's this British guy coming over. And I eventually got to meet these kids, and I was looking for the underground scene of East Berlin. Thinking they've got to have one. They must have one for sure. They've got this kind of tepid kind of progressive rock music. Trying cross between Genesis and Deep Purple and sort of, like playing blues rock thing.
Ah.
Bit boring, but like, I thought there must be something else. And I remember saw this kid on the underground in East Berlin, and he was wearing drain pipe trousers, had spiky hair, and I was like, I bet he knows where the underground is. And he got off the train, and I jumped off and ran after him and collared him and said, "Hey, I'm British." And I spoke pidgin German then. Managed, and he didn't speak any English at all, but I managed to kind of like, explain I was looking for the underground scene. And I said, if you hear of anything, if you hear of any gigs or anything, because like there's nothing like that here. It's all forbidden. Everything's forbidden. There's no underground scene. I thought, well, you might, if you hear of anything, here's my name and address, postcard. Just send me a postcard, tell me, And I didn't hear anything from this kid ever again, And like about sort of like 6 months later, I get a letter from this girl asking to meet me in the Palast der Republik, which was like the East German Parliament. But they had a cocktail bar, and a disco. And I was like, okay, I'll go meet her in this palatial building. And she just kind of like basically heard me out. And she was involved in this underground scene. And she was like punk scene of East Germany. Punk rock was forbidden in East Germany. And so she introduced me to a circle of friends, and I got to know them. And, as you do, I was going over quite regularly and with these kids, and we'd go out for drinks and sit in bars and stuff. And we were in one place, and it had like these long trestle tables, and we're just sitting there chatting. And this one guy sat at the other end of the table, was like kind of sulking into his beer, just kind of like half listening to our conversation. And at one point he says to me, "You're not from here, are you?" Right? I don't like, "No, I'm from England." And he's like, "Hey, England." And then his attitude completely changed. And then he was like, "I never met anyone from England before. Tell me about the music scene. I like Pink Floyd and I like Jimi Hendrix." And I went, "Yeah, I like Pink Floyd and Jimi Hendrix too." And we started talking, and he told me that he had an electric guitar. And I was like, "Oh, do you play in a band?" Because no, I'm not allowed to play. I don't have a license. "What do you mean you don't have a license?" And he explained to me you needed a license to own an electric guitar. You needed a license to be able to play it in front of an audience, and you had to pass a proficiency test to even be able to gain anywhere near a license to be able to play to an audience. And I was like, "So where do you play your guitar?" And he goes, "In the church, what is called a blues mass." And I went, "What do you play?" He goes, "Oh yeah, cover versions like Bob Dylan, Eric Clapton, that kind of thing." I'd never be able to play this outside of the church. And he said they explained to me that the church is kind of like a silent protest against the communist regime. And I was like, "Oh, that's really interesting." Immediately thinking I could play with my band, because in the meantime I'd been, formed a band, Die Unbekannten, which means the unknown, and Nominous Omen, and I just thought, maybe I could do a gig with my band for my friends, So I went to see the priest, and he was like, it's a blues mass. It's not a gig, So you got to prayers. You got to pray. I'm like, "Yeah, I'll do everything. Anything you want me to do. I'll jump through fiery hoops if you want me." But no one had let me use their cassette players, because I knew I wouldn't be able to take a drum machine and instruments over. I'd have to borrow everything there. It's hard enough as it was. Finding someone who actually had an electric guitar or a bass guitar or an amplifier. There weren't any shops that sold this stuff in East Berlin. You couldn't just go to a shop and buy an electric guitar, an amp, and a cable, and form a band. It didn't happen. You could buy an acoustic guitar, so you could sing "Go Tell It on the Mountain" in some, beach somewhere, But an electric guitar was a weapon, And so it's really hard trying to get these instruments, and it just wasn't going to happen. I thought it's never going to happen. And then I played a gig in Czechoslovakia, a secret gig in Czechoslovakia. They managed to get, because in Czechoslovakia they made guitars, like Hungary and Czechoslovakia, they made electric guitars, and so they had a couple of friends who had this equipment, and so I was able to perform the illegally secret gig in Czechoslovakia for these dissident kids who went on to become part of the revolution years later. And it was basically a gig for Czechoslovakia's most wanted. All these kind of political dissidents all converged on this kind of farmhouse in the middle of nowhere on the outskirts of Bohemia. And I did this gig. I thought, if it's possible there, it's bound to be possible in East Berlin. but it wasn't going to happen. And, so, and at the same time, I'd already become kind of involved with this German punk rock band called Die Toten Hosen, who that means the dead trousers, right? And it's an expression meaning there's nothing happening here.
Okay.
And they you know, I'd recorded all their music, all the records onto cassettes, and smuggled these cassettes for my friends into East Berlin so they could listen to this music, and they understood that. I thought maybe it's probably a better and easier thing, because they're quite conventional. They don't need cassette players or anything like that. They just need a guitar, bass, and drums, and off we go. You know, eventually we'll find this stuff, and I asked these girls, you know, we could do this gig if you can find someone who will give us like the guitars and amplifiers and stuff. If you find them, we had to piece it together, you know, guitar from him, bass guitar from him, drum kit from him. And eventually we did. We found this band called Planlos who were a forbidden punk band who had most of the equipment that we needed, like one amplifier with about 10 inputs. Honestly, it was one amplifier. I had like an input for bass guitar, vocals, everything. You know. Sounded fucking awful, but it didn't matter. It was about the thing that we were going to do, you know. And I said to these girls, you know, like, do you really want to do this? Because if you get caught, you know, if we get caught doing this, I'll just get thrown out of East Germany, and I'll never be able to come back again. I'll never be able to smuggle your cassettes ever again. You'll probably never see me again, but your lives will change forever, because you'll probably end up in jail, and God knows what will happen. You know. And they were like, yeah, we want to do it, you know, because they wanted that thrill that I had when I smuggled cassettes into East Germany. They wanted a similar kind of thrill, I think. And they just didn't give a shit, really. Anything against the government, you know. And so we did this blues mass with the Totenhosen, you know, hoping that we invited 30 people, hoping that none of our friends would actually tell on us before, because we knew that, you know, like, somebody somewhere within our circle of friends is bound to be a Stasi informer, but you just didn't know who it was. You know, I didn't know if it was they weren't my girlfriends, but they were girlfriends. You know, if these friends were maybe also part of this, you know, you had no idea, you know, but we just kind of assumed that out of the 30 people, maybe one person might be, you know. And as it happened, nothing happened. You know, all through the gig, I expected the door to be kicked in and the Stasi would come bursting and arrest everybody, but we pulled it off. You know, and had prayers after, and everybody went home, you know, and then this concert became the thing of legend, because what it did was it kind of inspired all these other punk bands and young kids to be able to go to their local parish and say to them, you know, can we use your church as a practice room, or, you know, can we do a gig in your church, you know, and do a blues mass, you know. And it kind of kicked off, and throughout the whole of East Germany, all these kind of like punk bands started to emerge and play in the church, you know. And it was like, you know, it kicked off the whole thing in East Germany. It was really quite an inspiring event, and we didn't realize it until years later, actually, that when we'd done this, that it had caused this kind of knock-off effect throughout the whole of East Germany. And this was stuff of legend, you know. And then in 1988. In the meantime, I'd met this band called Die Vision, like the Vision. And they said, yeah, we want to do a benefit concert, blues mass in the Pankow area. You know, do you think, you know, if the Totenhosen are going to be coming to play in Berlin at a time, let us know, and then we'll do it, we'll coordinate it with them, you know, with their visit to Berlin. So I was like, okay, I'll tell you next time I know they're coming. A friend of mine in West Berlin was having a benefits concert for his magazine that he'd just been sued for defamation of character, somebody that it's written about. And the Totenhosen were coming to Berlin to play at this concert for the magazine. The magazine was called Ich und mein Staubsauger, which means me and my vacuum cleaner. It's a bit ambiguous. Anyway, so the Hosen came to West Berlin to play this benefits concert. And then I arranged with everybody that would go over to East Berlin and do this secret gig in Pankow with Division for 30 people again, you know, like in this church. The concert was disguised as the concert for starving Romanian orphans. That was the kind of like the reason for doing the gig. And the Totenhosen weren't announced. It was just Division were going to be doing the gig and have a support act. And Vision, like Tottenham was just going to turn up and play. You know? And in the meantime, I'd also befriended an American soldier who had bought a car so we could smuggle things into his easier, because American soldiers didn't get control. And so we were able to smuggle the instruments of the Totenhausen's own instruments this time. We could smuggle the guitars into East Berlin. And we get to this church, and outside there's this police car sitting there. And I'm thinking, oh dear, that's not good. And we look in the churchyard, there's like 600 people. And I'm thinking, like, oh no, we couldn't keep the trap shut, you know, like we only invited 30 people, and that was like 600. And I thought, this is going to go down really badly. And the priest comes and goes, no, the police have said that the Tottenham can't play. Like, oh man, how are you going to tell all these kids, you know? You've got to tell them, you've got to announce it to these guys that, you know, this Tottenham are not playing. I said, well, tell them a band from Dresden's going to play instead. And it's like, what band? I went, well, just say a band from Dresden's going to play. The Stars, they don't know what Tottenham look like. So police certainly don't, you know. So by the time they figured it out, you know, we'll have already done the gig. And so it did exactly that. And Tottenham played for 3/4 of an hour. Now, obviously, in the 600 people, there's obviously quite a few Stasi informers, you know. But the thing was like, they wanted to see the gig. Right? So they really wanted to see the gig. Even though they were Stasi informers, they still wanted to see the gig. So they let the band play for 3/4 of an hour, and then they thought, I'm going to have to say something, because otherwise they'll start. You know, the informers were going to get into trouble if they found out. You know, you knew but you didn't say anything. And so after 3/4 of an hour, we had to stop, and we thought, oh, you know, we got away with that, you know, pretty much. But then later on, everybody's flats started to get like, not broken into, but you know, infiltrated by the Stasi, and the Stasi would go through all the stuff and leave kind of little kind of hints to show that they'd been there and stuff. And it started to get really dark. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. And then you know, I was like kind of associated with this band Division, the East German record label, which was called Amiga. They were like, the authorities were in two minds. What do we do with this band Division? Because after this Totenhausen gig, the Division, suddenly their status suddenly went through the roof. You know, they'd played with the Totenhausen, you know, they'd arranged this secret gig, and the state was like, well, do we ban them or do we sign them? If we ban them, they'll become martyrs. If we sign them, we can control them. And so they signed them to Amiga, and then they asked me if I'd produce their record, which was another way of controlling me. You know? Oh, yeah. You know, so yeah, and as it happened to be the last album of the GDR, because as I'm making this record in the last like months of 1989, that East Germany is starting to fall apart, you know, and I'm trying to make this record in East Germany, East Berlin, you know, as all these kind of people are trying to leave the country, and political upheavals happening. I'm thinking, God, what's going on? And I finished recording the album, recording all the tracks, finished recording on the 2nd of November, 1989. And then I decided to go with a few friends on a holiday to Romania, yeah, traveling via Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Hungary in a car, you know, down to Nicolae Ceausescu's Romania in the winter of 1989. And we left on the night of the 8th and 9th of November 1989 to embark on this trip. A week later, you know, after finishing recording, I thought I needed a little bit of break and a bit of distance, so I could, thinking I'll go on this little holiday, a few weeks away, and then when I come back, I'll produce the record. Leave on the night of the 8th and 9th of November. And on the 9th of November, the Berlin Wall comes down. And I had no idea. I only found out like about 10 days later in the middle of Hungary that the wall had come down.
Wow.
It was madness. Yeah.
So you missed David Hasselhoff.
I missed it all. You know, well, actually, I caught the Czechoslovakian Revolution. You know, I was in Prague when they were having their revolution. And my friends who had, in the meantime, my dissident friends who I played to in 1982, they'd all become like, you know, be part of Václav Havel's kind of Občanské fórum, it was called. You know, it was like the political kind of party and stuff. They were one of my friends, Stasha Vondra. He was the spokesman for this Charter 77 movement, and he got put in prison and everything. And you know, and when we were going through Czechoslovakia, he was in prison at this point. You know, we come back and we're on Wenceslas Square in the middle of Prague, and with all these thousands of people protesting. And then there's this big cheer, and we went there like 3 days in a row, you know, every night to go and see what was happening. And then there's this big, one night, there's this big cheer, the ripple of kind of like excitement and that, like, wow, what's going on? You know, your skin was like, you know, hair standing up on end. It was like you knew something really positive had happened, you know. And I'm asking these kids, what's happening? Oh, the government have just resigned. You know, the communists have just resigned. And 5 minutes later on this balcony, there's my mate, you know, Sasha waving with Václav Havel and Alexander Dubček. And I'm like, wow, this is amazing. You know?
Wow.
And it was such a thrilling moment, you know. So all right, I missed the fall of the Berlin Wall. But at the same time, I caught, you know, something which was equally as interesting as with my friends in Prague as well.
And you got really into like the East German electronic scene around that, like the late 80s into the 90s. I was
well, yeah, I mean, you know, their electronic scene back then was a bit kind of like sort of like tepid Tangerine Dream impersonators. Okay. But when the wall came down, the younger kids, like the sort of like 19, 20-year-old kids, they'd been listening to Western radio, West Berlin radio. My friend Monica Dietl, she had a radio show, and which, you know, if I got bought records or got records from the UK, I'd give them her, and we go through on Thursday nights. We go through the records I've just got, and you know, with another friend of mine, we'd just go take our records to her, and she'd go through those and say, "I'll play that on the show, you know." And these kids in East Berlin, they would listen to the radio, Western radio, religiously because it provided them with music that was not state controlled. You know, it was this kind of like weird stuff, techno, you know, different, what's that, you know? And they had this impression that in West Berlin, there's this massive techno party scene going on because Monica would like announce tonight in UFO Club, there'd be this party. I mean, they had this impression that it was this massive scene. Because, you know, anything that was on the radio meant something powerful in East Germany. So they had no idea that we had one techno club in Berlin. It was about 50 square meters, you know, it was like nothing. So when the wall came down, that's what they wanted to have. They wanted to have this techno scene. And it didn't really exist. It was one club, you know. So they started to make their own. And as, you know, after the reunification of Germany, all these places were suddenly kind of like open to, you know, what should be part of the wall defences, these derelict buildings which had formed part of the wall, they suddenly were empty, and there was no jurisdiction because they were in the middle of no man's land. And so they were taken over, and they put a generator in, a few turntables, a PA system and everything, and have a party, you know. And in the actual fact, the reunification of Germany actually happened on the dance floor. Not particularly there, but like, you know, in other places, you know, before the actual reunification, because you know, these kids from the East wanted to experience something, and they come to like clubs like the Metropole or UFO, and it didn't matter whether you were from East Germany, no one cared, you know. It was like you just danced, took ecstasy and just danced all night, and it didn't matter where you're from. Everybody loved each other. And you know, the Cold War had ended, you know, the threat of nuclear holocaust had ended, and it was just a really beautiful feeling, you know, to be real. Oh, you know, this spectre of death and, you know, destruction is gone, you know, like, no longer this animosity. It doesn't matter where you're from, what colour your skin was, you know. We could just dance all night, you know.
Nice. I wanted to ask you about Shark Vegas. We should probably mention I watched B Movie the other night. I finally got a copy of the DVD in the States. It was great, and the soundtrack was awesome.
Thank you.
And I dug those Shark Vegas songs, but I know nothing about the band. So tell me the story.
Oh, well, from the Unbekannten was born Shark Vegas out of a desire to change our style, if you like, because the Unbekannten were kind of like new wavy, early punky kind of sound, really, because of our inability to play. It's more than anything else. But me and Alistair, we were kind of, we were into this kind of high energy disco music. I mean, I'd been a fan from like the 70s. The first time I heard Donna Summer, I Feel Love, I knew that was it. How did they make this record? But I had no idea how they'd made it, and it was like, that's the kind of sound that I want to make, something like that. And as machines started to get a little bit cheaper, sequencers and synthesizers, arpeggiators and stuff, it was like more like what we wanted to do, And we go to the Metropole discotheque, which was the biggest gay disco in Europe. We went there religiously every Friday and Saturday night, and I'd been going there since the minute I got to Berlin. But like when I met Alistair, I dragged him down, and it was like, wow, it was like this big, huge place, and fantastically friendly atmosphere, really nice. And they played this kind of deep underground, not kind of commercial disco music, but they played kind of underground disco music that you probably only heard in Paradise Garage or someplace like this, And I was like, that's the kind of music that we should be making. And then we got this proposal, this offer from Bernard Sumner, asked me if we wanted to go on tour with New Order after they just released like Blue Monday, and I decided at that point to stop doing Factory, actually, because I knew that Blue Monday was going to be a big record. And I thought, me and my flat, I'm not going to be able to handle this. It's not really going to happen. So I said to Rob, like, I think we should give this to a proper distributor and like let it happen. And so I stopped doing Factory. I was still their representative in Berlin, but in Germany, but I wasn't actually physically releasing the records or anything. And so I said, let's do it with Rough Trade. I know the guys at Rough Trade. We'd do it with them. And it just kind of like took off, And so as a kind of like consolation prize, Bernard asked us if we wanted to be their support act on the tour, cheap, get your mates on tour, don't cost them. And I decided, well, if we're going to go on like a European tour, international tour, I don't want to be called Die Unbekannt. It doesn't sound, no one can say it anyway. So let's change our name. Well, it got 2 new members just for the tour, and we said, let's change our name to Shark Vegas. It was like it came to me in the night, this I had no meaning to it at all. And so we formed this band, this new band Order. We blew them off stage every night, of course, as you do. And then we got invited to play in New York at the Danceteria. Yeah. And Bernard's like, there's one song in your set, I really like that. Yeah, You Hurt Me. We should do that as a single, put it on Factory. And so we released You Hurt Me on Factory 111, it was. Nice. And my mate Mark Farrow was a designer, a friend of mine from like, the 70s actually. And asked him if, would you design the cover for it? And he designed the cover. He went on to design the Pet Shop Boys covers, and quite a few Factory Records covers as well.
Nice.
And we did the Danceteria, in 1984.
Wow.
Which was quite a thrill, actually. And actually, the only reason for going to New York wasn't to actually do this gig in the Danceteria. I just used it as an opportunity because I only wanted to go to the Paradise Garage. I didn't care about actually doing the gig, and I didn't care about the Danceteria. Going to any fun house or any other clubs. I just wanted to go to see Larry Levan playing at Paradise Garage, and I was like, I'm determined to go there. And me and Alistair and Leo, our drummer, we went to the Paradise Garage, and we were the only white people in the line to get in, and this girl just was like, "You guys are not from here, are you?" I was like, "No, we're from Berlin, Germany." She's like, "Germany, wow!" Like she goes, "Look, you won't get in if you try and get in. I'll sign you in as a member. I'll sign you in." So she signed us in, and we got in, and it was fantastic. I got to meet Larry Levan, and it was like just incredible sound system. I've never even heard a sound system like this in the club ever before, or since actually. Wow. And I was like totally blown away by it. And then that kind of formed everything in virtually. After that, I was like, wow. Yeah. I was mind blown. Yeah. And then we did a compilation called, I think it was called Young, Snotty and Sexy. It was on Factory America. Yeah. We put a track on that compilation, and then Alistair decided he wanted to go back to the UK and live in the UK, and so he left after that. Shortly after that, and went back to the UK, and left me here. And I started to dabble then in kind of acid house and techno and stuff. And,
You were playing guitar in Shark Vegas.
no, I'm trying to.
Oh, okay.
Trying to play guitar.
You're saying,
I'm still trying to play guitar.
Okay. I just got to know that.
Yeah, I play keyboards and tape machine and synthesizer and try to play guitar.
Okay, because in B movie I saw you on guitar in the clips.
Yeah, well, that clip in Boo movie, that's on the Glenica Bridge, which is known as the Bridge of Spies because it's where they exchange Gary Powers and stuff. And what the reason why that shoot came about was I previously made a TV program for Britain for a British TV channel called Time Tees Television called The Tube, and I'd set up this gig with Dee Hout on the bridge. And about a year or 2 years later, the precursor to MTV in the UK was a TV channel called Music Box, and they came to do a Berlin special. And the producer had heard about this shoot on the bridge and wanted me to arrange that I play on this bridge. He had no idea that it had taken me months to get permission to get, And I was like, I'm not going to be able to do it in 24 hours. And the thing is, like, Shark Vegas opened German cable television in Germany, right? And there was a big kind of celebration, like, event in the city centre, and they'd put this stage up. And the first thing that Germans saw on German cable television when they turned the telly on was my band. And I was like, we did this gig, and he was like, we have to do this. We have to make a video for this TV show. Can you arrange to play on the bridge? And I was like, oh God, it took me months to do the house. It'll never happen. But in the meantime, I got to know the people at AFN, right? And they had contacts to the authorities, of course. And so I got the head of AFN to get us permits to do this shoot. But there wasn't enough time to explain to the Russians on the opposite side of the bridge that we were going to be doing this. And so there was all this hullabaloo on the other side of the bridge. They're all going to invade, basically invade. And the idea was for our video, we decided that it was supposed to be like spies coming out of the cold, being the spy bridge. We're coming out of the cold. And if you look at the video, we've all got plasters on our heads and faces and stuff which kind of is supposed to kind of symbolize we've been tortured in communist Germany. And we were being coming out of the cold into the West. That was the idea behind this video was.
So you took B movie around the world, to China and Colombia. Tell me about those adventures.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, this movie actually, it wasn't my idea to make this movie. Yeah. I mean, obviously, I had loads of footage and things I'd done, but it wasn't my idea. Jörg Hopper, who was the producer, he had this idea to make a film which was there was a video a couple of years before called Berlin Super 80s, which was like a kind of a compilation of people's Super 8 movies from the 80s that had no soundtrack, coupled together with music from that time. Like my band, Unbekannt, was one part of one of the videos, and other bands, underground bands of no significance that they supplied the musical soundtrack for this kind of experimental Super 8 films. And Jörg had seen this and thought maybe we should do a more kind of expanded version, like a 90-minute version kind of narrative of the progression of Berlin in 10 years. And he asked me if I would be prepared to do the soundtrack and do the restoration of the music so it'd sound good in the cinema. And as we were talking, I was thinking, I've got stuff there. Maybe I could flog him a few pieces of footage, and he could get a bit of extra money for making giving him these images of Berlin of the 80s. And then I started telling him my story, and he was like, "Well, I've changed my idea now. What about you telling your story as a Brit coming to Berlin and being part of this Berlin scene, the things you did as an B movie, and about my life in Berlin in this kind of avant-garde scene, over 10 years. And with this film, then I started to do, show it in different places, and I showed it in South America, in Colombia. I did a tour of Colombia, and then I had this invitation to do a 2-month tour of China with this film, which was a very interesting experience because it wasn't kind of really official as such, but it was sponsored by the Goethe Institute, and so having the Goethe Institute's sign of approval kind of gave it this kind of flexibility, which, it's not a film that's going to be shown in the cinema in China, right? It's a film that's being shown in clubs that had something to do with music scene of that particular city. So we'd be showing it in these dives, where they had club life since sort of the mid-90s or whatever. We take it for granted that, music scenes kind of evolved almost at the same time, but in China, they only started to open up at the end of that, mid-90s, really. The first punk band emerged in 1996, which is 20 years after the first punk band in the UK, and it's from that point on, it kind of started to open and started to get clubs and have what they call live houses and stuff, concerts and stuff. And so for them, it was all kind of really fresh, in a sense, and they were kind of fascinated to see this world of 80s Berlin that they didn't actually know about. They'd heard, of things, but they didn't really know anything about it. And to see it on the screen and with original footage and everything, it was kind of quite fascinating. And so I was giving lectures and stuff and explaining the background behind the film and the footage and things. And I did a 5-day kind of stint at this kind of art and film art music sort of academy in Wuhan, which was fascinating, actually. And it was every night we'd show the film, every night I'd give a talk, and it was packed out, every night, and it was quite fascinating, and 2019, December 2019, I went to Moscow to show the film, and because of what it meant, the story, if you like, and the kind of the inspiration it might give to young people. I was getting quite a lot of negativity on the internet in Russia, from people who didn't really want young people to see this movie. It's a shit film. You don't waste your time, kind of thing.
Wow.
So we showed this movie in the biggest cinema in Moscow, which just looked like it's got a mosaic on the outside from the revolution, because it's this big, massive cinema from Stalin's time, basically. And it's 650 people came to see the film, and it was pretty impressive. And these activists, I DJ'd for them in a former paint factory on the outskirts of the city, and all these kind of activists are kind of on the streets today, going, protesting against certain draconian measures that are being undertaken in Russia right now. And for them, I was doing this thing, and maybe the B movie inspired them in some way. I don't know, but I don't know if I'm going to be going to Russia very soon. Yeah.
How'd it go over in Colombia? I don't usually think of Colombia as a synth pop type of place, but
well, it isn't, and it is. It's very Latino, of course. But there was people who had Colombians who'd been in Berlin and they'd studied here or whatever, and they'd been hanging out here. Been to parties and techno parties and stuff like that. And they wanted to bring a bit of that action back to Colombia, but also show them this film, so they get a bit of an idea of how the techno scene eventually evolved and from where it evolved from, out of this ashes, if you like, And so there was this festival called Ambulante Festival. It's like a kind of a musical film festival that kind of travels around Colombia. And I went with the film and we showed it I mean, they actually showed it in the jungle. I didn't go to the jungle shoot because they didn't have enough. It was. I've no idea what happened there, but I know they went into the jungle with the film and showed it there.
Wow.
But I did go to other places, like to Medellin and stuff, and Bogota, and we showed it all around. And it was quite incredible, because like we didn't just show it in the cinemas as well. We actually took it into the poor areas of the city, into the mountainsides where all the poor people live. And these kind of kids who kind of quite well-off kids, I suppose, from rich families, they had a program which they go up into the favelas and stuff, and they teach these young kids like how to bake bread and how to make a skateboard and all these different things. And one evening they decided they were going to take us up into the mountains there, and they'd put a big screen and they'd show this film for free, and they did exactly that. And the whole flipping town came to watch it. They're like, "What's going on?" I mean, they didn't even know where Berlin is, let alone know what was going on, really. It had Spanish subtitles. Half of them couldn't read. The little kids are translating for the old ladies. What's going on. And when the film had finished, all these old ladies are coming up to me, like hugging me and telling me, you survived, and they thought it all happened last week. They had no idea it was like in the 80s. Yeah, it was fascinating. Yeah.
Wow. So I want to talk to you about your new record. It came out last fall. Is that right?
No, I released my album with Elena Chosna, who's a Lithuanian singer. It was called Children of Nature, the LP. We released it on the 26th of May.
Oh.
Yeah. And my mum's birthday.
Yeah.
Which was 96. I thought, I'll give her a 96th birthday present and release my album on her birthday. I mean, that was also a thing, like I'd taken my movie to Lithuania and to Vilnius and showed it at a film festival there, a big film festival. It was actually the big kind of celebration event of the year kind of thing. This film festival in Vilnius. It was in this kind of palatial building, like opera house. The president of the nation came and gave the opening speech, and then people performed on stage. And I'd arrived in the afternoon, and they went, "Oh, we've decided you can be on this, perform." I'm like, "What am I supposed to do? Not an instrument." And they went, "Oh no, just play some of your music, just DJ." I was thinking, okay, I'm going to DJ. They've got like 2 decks and 2 turntables and CD players, and on this big stage. And I'm thinking, okay, and then they went, yeah, you can just DJ, and and there's people on stage doing all these kind of gigs. They like someone playing the ukulele, someone playing the piano, acrobats, and all this kind of thing. And then it's like me, and it's like, I'm like, oh yeah, you can only play one song. I mean, well, that's not DJing. Yeah, but then no one will know, like, what we're supposed to be doing. So I'm on stage and the compares there, and he says, "So Mark, like what you're going to be showing your film B movie at the festival and everything, and what you're going to play for us tonight." And I'd just done a remix for New Order, yes, of one of the tracks off the album, Music Complete, and I thought, I'm going to play that. And they said, "Oh yeah." So I said, "What are you going to do?" And I just pointed my finger like this. I'm just going to press play. And so I press play, and the music starts, and I'm looking at like Lithuania's like nomenclature. It's like the generals in the army and kind of all these women in nightgowns and blokes with like bow ties on and everything, and evening dress, and it's like watching all these people, and I could see their faces kind of change from this kind of smile to this kind of like. I'm thinking, oh God, is it that bad? It's really. I couldn't wait for it to be over. I was like, I couldn't even look at the audience because it was so embarrassing. I was like, what am I doing? Standing here watching this CD player, twiddling the knobs, trying to get the sound to sound better. And I was like, oh God, got off stage. I was like, I'll never want to do that ever again. And then this guy comes to me and he went, wow, that was amazing. Yeah. And he introduced himself. He was a singer. And, I said, it's fantastic, and then he explained to me that I didn't know this, behind me was this massive screen, and they'd been showing the clip like a trailer from B movie in the background, right, and all this kind of rioting and nudity and everything. And I was like, oh gosh, okay. So and that's why everyone was kind of looking so shocked, you know. It wasn't me at all. And we got chatting, and he said, yeah, I'm going to come to the after party. And so I did a DJ'd at the after party, at this after party. After this performance, I actually did go do some DJing, and had everybody dancing in this club. You know, it's quite nice. And next day I went and met him, and as I went for this meeting the next day, I'm walking through the town. You know, everyone's kind of waving at me and smiling, going, "Hey, hello, hello, hello," and I'm like, "I'm a great friend of these Lithuanians." And then I get to this place, and this guy, "I saw you last night," you know, and I didn't realize it had been broadcast on national television, this event. And in the middle of the city centre, they erected this kind of like 4 million square metre TV screen so that like thousands and thousands of people could stand in the freezing cold and watch this opening ceremony to their film festival. So everyone had seen it, and so everybody knew how it was. And it was really weird. And so I just like, you know, got talking to Alan Ash, Ches Chosman, discovered he'd been in this band, in, you know, the first kind of pop band after the fall of communism. You know, he himself is Iraqi. He was born in Baghdad. His mother is Lithuanian. His father was an Iraqi. And when Saddam Hussein started, you know, gassing his own people, kind of thing, he's an Iraqi Kurd. So he decided, his mother said, like, you know, go to Lithuania and live there. And so he grew up in Lithuania during the 80s. And when the communists, you know, the Russians, you know, gave Lithuania its independence, he did the thing that he'd always wanted to do and formed a band. So he was like one of the first kind of like pop artists of like new free Lithuania, you know, and he had this kind of symbolism and status and stuff. And he was a very nice chap. And I just like, you know, thought, okay, let's try and do something. I got this proposal from this French film director to make a song for a film called The Call of the Wolf, which was kind of like a contemporary Cold War thriller, submarine thriller about a submarine. And he needed a love song, and he liked my music, and he asked me if I'd like a love song. And I thought, well, I'll ask Alan if he wants to sing it, and we'll do something together and see where it goes, you know. And so he sang this one song on the album called Losing My Mind. And we ended up making an album together.
Nice.
Yeah.
We were talking about Depeche Mode before the interview started, but as soon as I put it on, I was like, this is that sort of dark, you know, feel that, you know, all my favorite Depeche Mode stuff has. Yeah,
well, you know, that has been my, you know, inspiration too. I mean, I know, you know, Daniel Miller and all these guys, you know, and it's like, you know, Martin Goy used to live in Berlin for a while with the girlfriend who lived in a flat house that friends of mine lived in and stuff. So it's really, they're quite close to me too, in a sense, as much as New Order. Right? And you know, that's the kind of music that I make, really, and I've always made, really. You know, if you listen to the Captain, it's not that far removed from what I'm still doing today, really. And that Sharp Vegas, really, for that matter. You know? Still kind of like dancey, but kind of dark, you know. Not really moved on anywhere, really, have I? Just that sounds a bit better these days.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for coming on the show.
You're very welcome.
You got anything else you want to add? What's coming up?
Very welcome.
You still there?
What's coming up? What's coming up is my. You hear me now?
Yeah.
Have I gone?
We're good.
Yeah. We're good. Yeah. What's coming up next is my remix for New Order. I did a remix for Be a Rebel, and that comes out, I think, in like March, beginning of March. That's the next release, I think. And I'm also planning an album, which is going to probably be, I mean, it'll be like a double album when it's physical, yeah, for sure, because it's quite a few tracks. But, you know, that's going to be, first of all, I'm going to release it digitally, simply for the reason that the pressing plants are overwhelmed with a backlog because of the lockdown. So they already had like a 6-month waiting list, but with the lockdown that's kind of multiplied. And with this added third lockdown, it's kind of like tripled it. So there's physical releases are really kind of, you're gonna have to wait really. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to release it digitally for the interim, and then when eventually get round to making a physical record, I will, because I love records.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You can't collect an MP3. You know what I mean? You can't having a stream. I don't do streaming. I'm not into that. It's not my world. I like to actually be able to hold a record in my hands and look at it and kind of put it in my collection and kind of look at it and bring it out and play it whenever I want, and not be kind of like held hostage by whatever the streaming platform decides it wants to have on its platform. Because if they say, that record, we don't like it, it's off. I mean, what do you do then? If that's your favorite song and they decide they don't like it, well, that's it, you're done. You'll never hear it again. Look at some kind of watered down 120 KB version of like it's on YouTube or something. It's like, nah, I'm not into that. I want to have something physical in my hands. I want to be able to hold it and feel it and smell it and touch it and play it whenever I want, and not be held hostage to some streaming service or something. So I do want my music to be physical, and to be collected by people, because you can give a record as a gift. You give an MP3 to someone as a gift, what do you fuck? It's not interesting.
You froze again.
That's what I'm doing next. So am I moving now?
Yes.
Am I there? Am I there?
We're good.
Yeah. So I could hear you actually, even though I'd frozen. Yeah. So someone my next album will be, I don't know. I've not set a release date yet because I'm still in the process of putting it together. But I reckon it'll be sort of like April, something like that. Yeah.
Cool. Well, maybe we'll talk again then.
Possibly.
Awesome.
Anytime.
Awesome.